It was a time when Israel was erupting into chaos. Following the threat of war from the Philistines, God's chosen people had slowly begun to reject him. So God reluctantly gave them Saul as king, the most jealous and prideful leader Israel had ever seen. Saul's rage and bloodshed shook the land, and the people suffered because they had chosen a mere man instead of trusting God. But God had not forgotten his people. In the quiet fields of Bethlehem, he was preparing an answer. From a lonely pasture came a boy who would change history forever. David. His very name carried the promise of a heart after God's own. This is the story of the mightiest shepherd who faced giants with nothing but a sling and faith. The king who ruled with justice and worshipped with a heart that trusted the Lord. But it is also the story of the man behind the crown, his fears, his failures, and his prayers. Because David was human. And his greatest battles were not only against armies and kings, but against loneliness, temptation, and the crushing weight of being a king. David had lived in silence, hidden amongst the hills of Bethlehem, faithfully protecting his father's sheep. Tending the flock had become his occupation, not by passion, but because, in his father Jesse's eyes, it was the only thing he could do well. David was not expected to do or become much. A simple life without much struggle would be good enough. Jesse showed love and care, but he could never match the kind of love David had received from his mother. David's mother was different. Though the scriptures never tell us her name, and her life is hidden in silence, she left a mark on David that no one could erase. She taught him to love God and worship him the right way. She would often say, "God sees the hearts and the reins of men." Unlike anyone else, she believed that David would be a man of strength. While others overlooked him, David carried her faith like a torch. The warmth of her attention shaped him, and the lessons she whispered in his youth stayed with him in the quiet of the fields. He was tasked with the hard jobs, but never was resentful. He worked dutifully, carrying the lessons his mother had sown into his heart. As the youngest of Jesse's sons, David watched his older brothers pursue their dreams while he quietly paused his own. He was a warrior in a field, not on a front line. While his brothers were out fighting, David was tending sheep. While swords clashed in the distance, he held a sling in silence. While Israel's soldiers lined up to face the enemy, David was guarding lambs from lions and bears. Yet David never grumbled, never fought for recognition. Always at his side was a sling, always on his back, a harp. Small in stature, simple in dress, but remarkable in spirit. He followed his mother's way, even when no one else seemed to notice. And one day he would say, "Truly I am your servant, Lord. I serve you just as my mother did. You have freed me from my chains." Psalm 116:16. Sometimes, in the stillness of the fields, David would whisper, "Lord, do you see me? Am I enough with just this sling and these songs?" And somehow, peace would settle in, as if God himself had answered, yes. He was a boy chosen by God for an extraordinary destiny, though he did not yet know it. What David didn't know was that he was already in training. All of it was preparation, not just for battle, but for kingship. His songs of praise echoed through quiet fields. "The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything I need. He gives me strength and leads me along the right paths. Even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, because you are with me." Psalm 23. Though overlooked by his father and brothers, God had seen him. Not just the giant killer inside him, but the quiet shepherd who stayed when no one noticed, who fought when no one watched, who dreamed even when nothing around him made room for those dreams. The boy would one day stand before Goliath, lead a nation, and be remembered forever as a man after God's own heart. He didn't know that one day a simple errand would carry him to the valley where giants fall and kings rise. Samuel, the prophet who once anointed Saul as king under God's instruction, was in mourning. Saul had disobeyed the Lord, and Samuel knew his time as king was ending. But then the Lord said to him, "You have mourned long enough for Saul. I have rejected him as king. Take your flask of olive oil and go to Bethlehem. Find a man named Jesse, for I have chosen one of his sons to be king." 1 Samuel 16:1. Samuel hesitated. "How can I do this? If Saul hears of it, he will kill me." But God replied, "Take a young heifer with you and say you've come to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse and his sons, and I will show you which of them to anoint." 1 Samuel 16:2-3. Samuel obeyed. When he arrived in Bethlehem, the people trembled. "Why is the prophet here?" they whispered anxiously. The elders came out, fearful, and asked, "Do you come in peace?" "In peace," Samuel assured them. He performed the purification rite for Jesse and his sons, and invited them to the sacrifice too. When they arrived, Samuel took one look at Eliab, the eldest, and thought, "Surely this is the Lord's anointed." The eldest, Eliab, looked every inch a king, tall and confident. But the Lord said, "Do not judge by appearance or height. I have rejected him. People see the outward appearance, but I look at the heart." 1 Samuel 16:7. One by one, Jesse's 7 sons were presented to Samuel, and one by one, God rejected them. Then Samuel asked, "Are these all the sons you have?" Jesse hesitated. There was one more, the boy he hadn't thought to include. "There is still the youngest," Jesse said, almost apologetically. "He's out in the fields watching the sheep and goats." "Send for him," Samuel replied. "We will not sit down until he arrives." David had been summoned many times before, but this time was different. This time, the servants told him to clean up before meeting his father's guest. David paused. When has my father ever cared how I appear before his guests? He wondered. He skipped the formalities of the gathering and went straight to his father. The moment David arrived, still smelling of sheep, dust on his clothes, God whispered to Samuel, "This is the one." 1 Samuel 16:12. Samuel looked over at David, still smelling of sheep, dust on his clothes. He looked nothing like his brothers. David's eyes met his, and he realized his eyes were bright and full of life. David stood there in awe. He wanted to speak, but no words came. His gaze met Samuel's, then moved to his brothers, staring back in confusion. What is happening here? He wondered. Then, without hesitation, Samuel took the flask and poured the anointing oil over David's head. The fragrance filled the room, and in that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. David wiped the oil dripping down his face. He didn't understand it all, but something inside him stirred. A weight. A quiet whisper that said, "You are seen. You are chosen." He looked at his father, then his brothers. No one spoke. For the first time, David felt greater than ever before. From that day on, David knew his life would never be the same. 1 Samuel 16:13. Eliab clenched his jaw. The oil was meant for a warrior, not a shepherd. Jesse stood still, eyes darting between Samuel and his youngest son. He had never expected a day like this to come. Not such honor. Not for his family. Not even for David. But Jesse said nothing. He simply watched as oil ran down the face of the son he had nearly forgotten. Little did he know that the boy anointed with oil would one day write songs that shook generations, slay giants, and father kings. David still smelled like sheep. He didn't carry a sword. But the same hands that had cared for lambs would one day take down a giant. The same heart that was once overlooked would one day lead a nation. On his way to Ramah, Samuel's heart and mind was full of thoughts about the boy. David, the one not even called to the sacrifice, neglected by his family, but not by God. God's choice may have been hidden from men, but to Samuel it was clear. This boy would change the course of history. Meanwhile, in Saul's palace, joy had faded. The Spirit of the Lord had left the king, and the Lord sent a tormenting spirit that filled him with depression and fear. His moods turned quickly, sometimes furious, sometimes deeply sad. His servants, worried for him, said, "My lord, let us find someone who plays the harp. When the spirit troubles you, his music will comfort you." One of the servants said to Saul, "One of Jesse's sons from Bethlehem is a talented harp player. Not only that, he is a brave warrior, a man of war, and has good judgment. He is also a fine-looking young man, and the Lord is with him." So Saul sent messengers to Jesse to say, "Send me your son David, the shepherd." Jesse held the letter in trembling hands. As a father, Jesse had hoped to hide David, shield him from the weight of his anointing, perhaps even from destiny itself. But ever since the prophet Samuel poured oil upon his youngest son's head, Jesse had known. The Lord had chosen David. And who could fight the will of God? He had told himself he was protecting his youngest son, but perhaps, in truth, he was afraid. Afraid of the danger that comes with favor. Afraid of what it might cost David to be chosen. Now, with the king calling, Jesse could no longer hide behind silence. He had to choose, to step aside or stand in the way of God. Quickly, he summoned David and sent him to Saul, along with a young goat, a donkey loaded with bread, and a wineskin full of wine. David, on the other hand, did not hesitate. He was growing familiar with these sudden callings, moments that pulled him out of the fields and into the unknown. Since the day of his anointing, a quiet boldness had begun to settle in him. He walked with a strength not his own. And so, not long after, David stood within the towering halls of the palace, harp in hand, and began to serve. His fingers danced across the strings, and his music carried the peace of green pastures and still waters. And though the words were not yet written, the song in his spirit declared, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked advance against me to devour me, it is my enemies and my foes who will stumble and fall." Psalm 27, 1-2. As the melodies filled the room, the darkness around Saul lifted. His breathing steadied. The heavy weight in the air lightened. "What is your name, boy?" the king asked, voice hushed by wonder. "I am David, son of Jesse," David replied. David looked into the king's eyes filled with exhaustion, haunted by something broken within. He didn't see a rebel. He saw a man who had once walked with God and now stood outside the light. David studied Saul and only hoped the Spirit of the Lord would be given unto him again. To Saul, there was something about this boy, something beyond what he had been told. He had expected a musician, perhaps even a skilled one, but not this presence. David's calm wasn't the arrogance of youth, it was something deeper, weightier, as if the boy carried not just a harp, but the breath of heaven. Saul couldn't name it. but he felt it. This shepherd stood before him with the quiet strength of someone already chosen. In time, Saul grew fond of David. He named him his armor-bearer, drawing him close in trust. And whenever the dark spirit returned, David would play, and right there, Saul found peace again. 1 Samuel 16:21-23. And in the stillness of those royal chambers, the shepherd's harp became more than music. It became a vessel of divine mercy, a channel to the presence of God. In David's song, God whispered hope to a crumbling throne. And though no crown rested on his head, already the Lord was placing him in the heart of the kingdom. At the war front, the Philistines had gathered their army for battle against Israel. King Saul responded by gathering his Israelite troops near the valley of Elah. So there they stood, Philistines on one hill, Israelites on another, with the valley stretched between them. Tension gripped the Israelite camp. Every man waited for the first move, but none dared to make it. Then, from the Philistine lines, a figure emerged, Goliath, a champion from Gath. Towering over 9 feet tall, his bronze armor glinting in the sunlight. Each step made the ground seem to tremble, and when he spoke, his voice rolled like thunder across the valley. His armor-bearer walked before him, carrying a great shield. Goliath stopped and shouted his challenge. "Why are you coming out to fight? I am the Philistine champion, and you are only the servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be ours. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man to fight me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, fear gripped them. The Philistine wasn't asking for the whole army, only one man. But for 40 days, morning and evening, the challenge was repeated. And for 40 days, no one stepped forward. Not even King Saul. In Bethlehem, Jesse's 3 oldest sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shimea, were already with Saul's army. Jesse, now old and slower on his feet, often relied on David to help around the house. David would travel back and forth between tending sheep and carrying our tasks. One day, Jesse called him. "Take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread to your brothers, and take these 10 cuts of cheese to their captain. See how they are, and bring me back a report." David left the sheep with another shepherd and set out early the next morning. When David reached the camp, the Israelites were rushing toward the battle line with shouts and cries. Then, as before, Goliath stepped out from the Philistine ranks, hurling the same insult and the same challenge. The moment the Israelites saw him, they ran back in fear. Quiet whispers rippled through the ranks. "Have you seen him? He comes out each day to defy Israel." David felt anger rise in him. What will a man get for killing this Philistine and ending his defiance? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway, that he should be allowed to defy the armies of the living God? The soldiers answered him, "The king has promised a great reward. He will give the man one of his daughters in marriage, and the man's family will never pay taxes again." Eliab overheard David speaking. He walked over, his voice hot with anger. "What are you doing here? And what about those few sheep you're supposed to be watching? I know your pride and deceit. You just came to see the battle." David had long felt his older brother's rejection, and since the day Samuel anointed him, it had only grown stronger. "What have I done now?" David shot back. "I was only asking a question." But word of David's boldness spread quickly. It reached King Saul, who sent for him. In the king's tent, Saul looked him over. "You can't fight him," Saul said. "You're just a boy. and Goliath has been a warrior all his life. David stood firm. I've cared for my father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and carried off a lamb, I went after it, struck it, and rescued it. If it turned on me, I wrestled it by the jaw and killed it. I've done this with lions and bears, and I will do the same to this Philistine. The Lord who rescued me from them will rescue me from him." Saul saw the fire in David's eyes. "Go," he said at last, "and may the Lord be with you." Saul's armor was brought, but it was heavy and awkward. David tried it, then set it aside. He realized that if this battle would be won, it would be done just as God had trained him with his father's sheep, without armor, without sword. That night, a tent was given to him to rest and prepare for the battle ahead. While the camp had settled, David remembered his nights among the sheep, watching with one eye and sleeping with the other. And then a song arose in his spirit as worship and prayer. "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my strength, in whom I will trust." Psalm 18, 1-2. The words steadied his heart. These were the moments when lions and bears had come, and they had always met David prepared, just as Goliath would. Still in the spirit of praise, David walked to a nearby stream. He knelt and chose 5 smooth stones. Not with might, not with strength, but with the wisdom of God. As his hand touched the first stone, a memory stirred in his heart. The same God who had saved him before would save him again. That stone represented faith. The second stone felt like obedience. He had not chosen this battle. God had chosen him instead. The third stone echoed courage, the fire to run forward when all others ran away. The fourth was preparation. Every hidden fight with lions and bears had led to this very moment. The fifth stone was victory, a reminder that the battle belonged to the Lord. Then David rose, not just with stones, but with a song burning in his spirit. With his sling in hand, David was ready to face Goliath. The Philistine champion stepped forward. At first, Goliath thought the Israelites had sent someone to deliver a message. He saw the young lad walking toward him, and with his shield-bearer in front, he waited for the boy to speak. But David said nothing. He didn't carry a message. Then Goliath suddenly realized the truth. This boy had been sent to fight him. He laughed with scorn. A boy, still in his youth, small and not even armed. What audacity!
Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? Come closer, and I will give your flesh to the bird.
And to the beasts of the field, he hissed. The giant's laughter rolled across the valley, and the Philistines also shouted with him. But on the other side, the Israelites trembled back. Their hearts sank. David, however, stood firm. He remembered the lion. He remembered the bear. And he remembered how the Lord had delivered him every time. Now, his heart only burned with one thought. This giant must fall. He lifted his voice, strong and steady.
You come to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to you in the name of the Lord,
the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied.
Today, the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and the whole world will know there is a God in Israel.
For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. 1 Samuel 17:45-47. The valley went silent. Even the Philistines, who had been laughing a moment ago, grew very uneasy. Goliath rose to his full height, fury blazing in his eyes. How could one so fragile, without armor or sword, dare challenge him? He towered over David, gripping his spear, ready to strike. Then David moved. He didn't wait for Goliath to meet him where he was. With his focus and quickened steps, he ran straight toward Goliath. His feet pounded the earth, and dust rose behind him. The Israelites gasped. Some cried out while others watched in frozen silence. Quickly he put his hand in his bag, took a stone and slang it. The sling spun in David's hand very fast, and then the stone flew. It cut through the air with speed and struck Goliath deep into his forehead. His eyes went wide. The giant's grin vanished immediately. He stumbled and tried to steady himself, but it was too late. In that moment, he knew the god of this shepherd boy had triumphed. With a crash, Goliath fell forward to the ground. His armor clanged like thunder, and dust rose in a cloud around his body. For a moment, there was heavy silence, and no one moved. Then whispers broke into shouts. The Philistines stepped back in horror. Their champion was gone. The Israelites blinked and roared in triumph, stunned. But David wasn't finished. He ran to the fallen giant, pulled Goliath's own massive sword from its sheath, and with one stroke, ended the battle. Fear came upon the Philistines. They fled in terror, scattering in every direction. Weapons clattered to the ground as they ran. The Israelites, once filled with fear, now surged forward with a mighty shout and chased them across the valley. David stood tall, lifting the head of Goliath high for all to see. This was no dream. The God who had anointed him in secret had proven him in public. And from David's lips came a song. The Lord delivered me from my strong enemy, from those who hated me, for they were too strong for me. By my God, I have run through a troop. By my God, I have leapt over a wall. It is God who gives me strength and makes my way perfect. Psalm 18, 17, 29, 32. From his seat, King Saul had watched the entire battle. He saw the boy who once played the harp for him, now standing as a victorious warrior before all Israel. Awe filled his heart, but unease crept in as well. He turned to Abner, the captain of his army. "Abner," Saul asked, "whose son is this young man?" Abner shook his head. "As surely as you live, O king, I do not know." "Find out," Saul commanded, his eyes still fixed on David. When David returned from the battlefield, Abner brought him before the king. David still carried the head of Goliath in his hand, but he had kept the armor in his tent on the battlefield. "Tell me about your father," Saul said. David, not surprised, answered, "His name is Jesse, and we live in Bethlehem." It should have been the beginning of friendship between Saul and David, but soon it would turn into bitter hatred. But David would not keep Goliath's head with him. Instead, he would carry it to Jerusalem. At that time, Jerusalem was still in the hands of the Jebusites, and yet he placed the head there. It was more than a trophy of war. It was the prophecy in action. The very city where he laid Goliath's head would one day become his stronghold, the city of David, the place where the ark of God's presence would rest. And far beyond David's story, another son of David would one day ride into Jerusalem, not to place the head of an enemy there, but to crush the serpent's head once and for all. What David began, Christ would finish. David was heading out when he collided with Jonathan, the king's son. Their eyes met, and there was an immediate bond between them. Jonathan recognized something more than courage in David. He saw the hand of God upon him. And right there, because he loved him as he loved himself, Jonathan made a solemn pact with David. He sealed it by taking off his robe and giving it to David, along with his tunic, sword, bow, and belt. Their hearts were knit together in loyalty and trust, bound by covenant to stand with each other forever. 1 Samuel 18, 1-4. For David, that was the first bond of genuine friendship. He perceived the love Jonathan had for him, and he knew that it could only be God. Not long after, the Israelite army returned home from victory. Women from every town poured out into the streets, singing and dancing with tambourines and cymbals. Their voices rang out, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." But King Saul did not share their joy. With every verse of the song, pride gave way to bitterness. His smile hardened into a jealous glare. "They credit David with 10,000s, and me with only thousands," he muttered. "Next, they'll be making him their king." From that day on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. But Jonathan, Saul's own son, saw no rival in him. Instead, he saw a brave and faithful man, a friend who would never betray him. Saul, however, had other plans. He noticed that David succeeded in everything he was given to do, so he decided to use that success against him. He promoted David to a commander over the men of war, secretly hoping the battles would claim his life. And from that day on, Saul kept David with him and no longer allowed him to return home to his father's house. The plan failed. Everywhere David went, God gave him victory. The people of Israel and Judah loved him all the more, for he led them with wisdom and courage. But Saul grew restless. The next day, as a tormenting spirit from the Lord came upon him, he raved in his house like a madman. David was summoned to play the harp, just as he had done before. His music was meant to soothe, but Saul's hand reached for a spear. Without warning, Saul hurled it at David, hoping to pin him to the wall. David dodged the strike and escaped. But Saul tried again and missed the second time. Fear crept into Saul's heart. He knew now that the Lord was with David and had turned away from him. Still, Saul didn't give up. He sent David away and made him commander over 1,000 men, hoping that greater responsibility might bring greater danger. But every battle only brought more success. And with every success, Saul's fear deepened, while David's favor grew before all Israel. David never stopped praising the name of the Lord. Saul's anger only deepened. His schemes didn't end there. Seeing that battles and spears had failed, he tried another way through marriage. First, Saul promised his oldest daughter, Merab, to David. "Only be brave for me and fight the Lord's battles," Saul said. But whether marriage or not, David's heart was never after rewards. He knew the battle was the Lord's, and for the Lord. The dream God had placed in him was already being fulfilled. The shepherd boy who once commanded his father's sheep, hidden and unseen, was now commander over the men of war. The same faith that guarded sheep in the wilderness was now guarding a nation before kings. When the time came, Saul changed his mind and gave Merab to another man. But Saul discovered something else. His younger daughter, Michal, loved David. This pleased him not because of affection, but because it gave him another chance to ensnare David. Saul said to David, "Today you have a second chance to become my son-in-law." Then Saul told his men to say to David, "The king really likes you, and so do we. Why don't you accept the king's offer and become his son-in-law?" When Saul's men said these things to David, he replied, How can a poor man from a humble family afford the bride price for the daughter of a king? When Saul's men reported this back to the king, he set a dangerous price for the marriage. Tell David that all I want for the bride price is 100 Philistine foreskins. Vengeance on my enemies is all I really want. In his heart, Saul thought, surely David will fall to the Philistines. But David accepted the challenge gladly. Before the time limit expired, he went out with his men and struck down not 100, but 200 Philistines. He returned and presented the full count before the king. So Saul gave his daughter Michal to David to be his wife. When Saul realized that the Lord was with David and how much his daughter Michal loved him, fear gripped the king's heart. The very man who had once calmed his spirit with music now stood as a living reminder that God's hand had moved on. Saul became even more afraid of David, and from that day forward, he remained David's enemy for the rest of his life. Yet, David continued to rise. Every time the Philistine commanders attacked, David led Israel to victory. He was more successful than all the rest of Saul's officers, and soon David's name was spoken across the land. From battlefield to village streets, his fame only grew. Saul could no longer hide the darkness in his heart. He urged his servants and even his own son Jonathan to assassinate David. But Jonathan, because of his deep affection for David, went straight to warn him. Tomorrow morning you must find a hiding place out in the fields. I'll ask my father to go out there with me, and I'll talk to him about you. Then I'll tell you everything I can find out. 1 Samuel 19, 2-3. The next morning, Jonathan confronted the king. He spoke boldly, reminding Saul of all the good David had done. The king must not sin against his servant David, Jonathan pleaded. He's never done anything to harm you. He risked his life to kill the Philistine giant, and the Lord brought a great victory to Israel. As a result, you were glad about it then. Why would you murder an innocent man like David? There is no reason for it at all. For a moment, Saul's heart softened. He listened to Jonathan and swore an oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be killed. Jonathan rushed back to David with the news, bringing him once again into the king's court. And for a while, it seemed like peace had returned. But peace in Saul's heart never lasted long. War broke out again, and David led his troops against the Philistines. His victories were unmatched, and his enemies fled before him. But with every triumph, Saul's envy grew darker. Saul sat alone in the dimly lit throne room. The crown on his head felt heavier than ever, as if it carried not just gold, but the weight of his fear. Outside, the city celebrated David's victory over Goliath. The cheers of the people pierced the quiet of the palace, and Saul's eyes darted to the doors, restless, suspicious. "Who is this boy?" he muttered, his voice barely controlled. "This shepherd, he defeats giants, and the people love him. My throne, my kingdom, could it slip from my hands?" He began pacing, hands trembling, thoughts racing. Everyone conspires. Everyone wants the crown, even David, the prophecy. It says he will be king. Me, replaced by a boy? I cannot allow it. He summoned his guards and advisors, his voice sharp and trembling with paranoia. "Watch him. Watch all of Israel. If anyone plots, if anyone whispers, I will know. I will protect my throne." The guards exchanged nervous glances as Saul sank back into his throne, consumed by fear. Every laugh in the streets, every cheer for David, felt like a dagger in his heart. His mind spun with suspicion, and the weight of his paranoia grew heavier with each passing moment. One evening, as David played his harp in the royal house, Saul sat, watching with a spear in his hand. Suddenly, the tormenting spirit from the Lord came upon him again. Saul, with a sudden rage, hurled the spear straight at David. The weapon whistled past David, slamming into the wall. David barely escaped with his life. He fled into the night, while Saul's spear remained trembling in the stone. That night, Saul's rage burned hotter than ever. He sent troops to surround David's house with one clear order: to kill him in the morning. But David's wife, Michal, heard of the plan and warned him. "If you don't escape tonight, you will be dead by morning." David froze. Shock washed over him. Could it be true? The same Saul he had fought for, played music for, honored as king, now sought his life? "What offense have I done?" his heart cried. But there was no time to search for answers. Michal rushed him toward the window. With a heavy heart, David climbed out into the night. And as his feet hit the ground, one resolve burned within him. Before thinking of anything, he would find safety first. So David fled into the darkness, just as Saul's soldiers closed in on the house. But Michal wasn't finished. She quickly grabbed an idol, laid it in the bed, and covered it with blankets. At the head, she placed a cushion of goat's hair, making it look as though David was still sleeping. When Saul's men stormed in, Michal told them he was sick and cannot get out of bed. The soldiers returned to Saul with the news, but Saul growled with fury and gave a heavy order: "Bring him to me in his bed, so I can kill him." The men rushed back, only to discover the deceit. Pulling away the blankets, they found nothing but an idol and goat's hair. Saul turned his anger on Michal. "Why have you betrayed me like this and let my enemy escape?" Michal answered in fear. She loved David enough to deceive her father. "I had to. He threatened to kill me if I didn't help him." Meanwhile, David ran to Ramah and found refuge with the prophet Samuel. There, in Naioth, David poured out everything Saul had done. Samuel took him in, giving him shelter among the prophets. But word soon reached Saul: "David is at Naioth in Ramah." So Saul sent men to capture him. Yet when they arrived, they saw Samuel leading a company of prophets in worship. The Spirit of God fell upon them, and instead of seizing David, they began to prophesy. Saul sent a second group. The same thing happened. A third group, and again, the Spirit overtook them, and they too prophesied. Angry, Saul himself went to Ramah. "Where are Samuel and David?" he demanded. The people lingering around answered him. They were at Naioth in Ramah. But just before Saul could reach them, the Spirit of God came upon him as well. He began to prophesy all the way, until he tore off his royal garments and lay bare on the ground. Saul prophesied all day and night naked in Samuel's presence. The people who saw it exclaimed in shock, "What? Is even Saul a prophet?" This was God's clear sign that his hand was on David, and no one, not even the king, could stop his plan. David heard that Saul himself came to Ramah, and he wondered what he had done for Saul to seek his life so desperately. In desperation, he fled to Jonathan. His voice trembled as he asked, "What have I done? How have I offended your father that he is so determined to kill me?" But Jonathan, unaware of what was happening, shook his head. "That's not true. You're not going to die. My father tells me everything, great or small. He wouldn't hide this from me." But David pressed harder. "Your father knows about our friendship. He has said to himself, 'I won't tell Jonathan, but I swear to you, I am only a step away from death.'" Believing, Jonathan's eyes filled with concern. "Tell me what I can do to help you." David explained his plan. Tomorrow was the festival, and his seat at the king's table would be empty. "If your father is calm, I'll know I'm safe. But if he burns with anger, then you'll know he is determined to kill me." Jonathan swore before the Lord, "If my father wants you dead, may the Lord strike me if I don't warn you, so you can escape and live. May the Lord be with you, as he once was with my father." The two renewed their covenant of friendship, sealing it with tears and loyalty. The festival came. Saul sat at the table, but David's seat was empty. The first day, he said nothing. But when David was missing the second day, Saul demanded, "Why hasn't the son of Jesse been here for the meal?" Jonathan answered carefully. David asked permission to go to Bethlehem for a family sacrifice. Saul's face twisted with rage. He roared, "You stupid son of a whore! Don't you see? As long as David lives, you'll never be king. Now go and bring him here. He must die." Jonathan rose to his feet in fury. "But why should he be put to death? What has he done?" Saul hurled his spear at his own son. Jonathan knew then it was true. His father was determined to kill David. The next morning, Jonathan went into the field. He shot an arrow beyond the boy who was with him and shouted, "The arrow is still ahead of you! Hurry!" David understood the signal. When the boy was gone, David came out of hiding. He bowed low 3 times, then embraced Jonathan. Both wept, but David's grief was greater. At last, Jonathan said, "Go in peace, for we have sworn loyalty to each other in the Lord's name. The Lord is the witness of the bond between us and our children forever." And so, with hearts broken, but covenant unshaken, they parted ways. Friends bound by God, though enemies surrounded them, David fled from Saul and came to the town of Nob, seeking refuge with Ahimelech the priest. But when Ahimelech saw him, the priest trembled. "Why are you alone? Why is no one with you?" David hadn't planned on answering questions he was still finding answers to, but he answered quickly, "The king has sent me on a private mission. My men are waiting elsewhere. But tell me, what do you have to eat? Give me 5 loaves or whatever you can spare." Ahimelech shook his head. "There is no ordinary bread here, only the holy bread, if your men have kept themselves pure." David reassured him, "Don't worry. My men always stay pure. Even in ordinary times they remain clean. How much more now?" And so, the priest gave him the consecrated bread. The bread of the presence just replaced that very day. But someone else was watching. Doeg the Edomite, Saul's chief herdsman, was in Nob. His eyes followed David. David saw Doeg, and he knew he had to escape quickly. David asked, "Do you have a spear or a sword?" "The king's business was so urgent, I didn't bring mine." Ahimelech hesitated at first, then replied, "The only weapon here is the sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you struck down in the valley of Elah. It is wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. Take it if you wish." David's eyes lit up. If there was any weapon suitable for that moment, that was it. "There is nothing like it. Give it to me," he said. Now armed with Goliath's blade, David fled again. This time to the Philistine city of Gath, into the hands of King Achish. But the king's officers whispered among themselves, "Isn't this David, the king of the land, the one they sing about? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." David's heart sank. Fear gripped him. He knew he was in danger. So he resorted to a desperate plan. He scratched at the doors like a madman. He let drool run down into his beard. The mighty warrior of Israel, the slayer of giants, pretended to be insane, just to stay alive. David left Gath, fleeing for his life. He reached the cave of Adullam, and soon his brothers and relatives found him there. They could have ignored him, or even sided with Saul to end him, but instead they joined him in a place not of luxury, in a place of distress. Relief and awe swelled in David's heart. He realized that after all concerning his family, God had not forgotten him. Amidst the struggles, this was God answering the question he asked during his days as a shepherd. From his heart came a prayer. "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and he helps me. My heart leaps for joy, and with my song I praise him. The Lord is the strength of his people, a fortress of salvation for his anointed one. Save your people and bless your inheritance. Be their shepherd and carry them forever." Psalm 28, 7-9. Other men began arriving too, men who were troubled, in debt, or just discontented, some exhausted, some broken, yet they all looked to David for safety and purpose. Before long, he led about 400 men. Not a formal army, but a band united by hope and destiny. David knew his life had always been beyond luxury. He just never knew that when royalty came calling for him, trouble would arise. From shepherd boy to warrior to hunted man, David's path had not been easy. But God, who had anointed him and filled him with his spirit, watched over him in every danger. His brothers would stay, but David's heart ached for his parents. They needed protection. For them, he traveled to King Mizpeh in Moab. "Please," he said, bowing low, "allow my father and mother to live here until I know what God has planned for me." The king agreed. Fulfilled that his parents were safe, he returned to his stronghold. The cave of Adullam shaped David once again. Even in danger, he found clarity. He guided his men with care, just as he had with his sheep. And he knew this moment was only a season, a time to learn, to grow, and to prepare for what God had ahead. One day, a prophet called Gad came to him. "Leave the stronghold," Gad said. "Return to Judah." David had been waiting for this whisper in the silence. He knew the next move had come, and he called his men together. "We go to the forest of Hereth," he commanded. "Trust God to guide us." Where Saul saw danger, David saw a chance to trust God. While fear and doubt filled Saul's palace, David stayed calm. He knew the throne would come by God's promise and not by force. The prophecy that scared Saul was instead a hope to David, a sign that God's timing would decide the future. Even as Saul's fear turned to anger, David stayed patient and brave. His life showed that real power comes from trusting God, not from fear. The news of David's arrival in Judah reached Saul. The king sat beneath the tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah, his spear in hand, surrounded by his officers. Rage burned in him. "Men of Benjamin," Saul shouted, "has Jesse's son promised you fields and vineyards? Has he made you captains? Even my own son helps him to kill me." Doeg the Edomite stepped forward. "I saw David in Nob. He spoke with Ahimelech the priest. The priest gave him food, the sword of Goliath, and even consulted God on his behalf." Saul's face twisted with fury. "Bring Ahimelech and all the priests of Nob." Ahimelech entered, trembling. "What is it, my king?" "Why have you conspired with David?" Saul thundered. "Why give him bread and a sword? Why consult God for him? You encourage him to kill me?" "My king," Ahimelech answered, voice shaking, "David is loyal. He is your son-in-law, the captain of your guard, honored in your house. I knew nothing of any plot." "You will die," Saul roared. "You and your family." The guards froze, unwilling to strike the priests of the Lord. Saul turned sharply. "Doeg, you do it." Doeg obeyed. That day, 85 priests fell by his sword, still clothed in holy garments. He destroyed Nob men, women, children, even livestock. Later, Abiathar stumbled into David's camp, breathless. "David, Saul, he has killed the priests of the Lord, my family, all of them." David's face fell in grief. "I knew it. When I saw Doeg, I knew he would tell Saul. My actions, they caused this." He took Abiathar's hand firmly. "Stay with me. Don't be afraid. The man who seeks my life seeks yours also. With me, you will be safe." One day, word reached David. The Philistines were raiding Keilah and stealing grain from the threshing floors. David turned to God for direction. "Should I go and fight them?" The Lord answered, "Go, save Keilah." But his men hesitated. They were already afraid in Judah, and the thought of facing an entire Philistine army terrified them. So David prayed again, and God confirmed his word. "Go, I will give you victory." With that assurance, David led his men to Keilah. They struck down the Philistines, seized their livestock, and rescued the people. But news traveled quickly. When Saul heard David was in a walled city, he thought he had finally trapped him. He prepared his army to march. David learned of Saul's plan and again sought God. He asked, "Will Saul come here?" The Lord said, "Yes, he will." Then David asked, "Will the leaders of Keilah hand me over?" Again the Lord said, "Yes." So David and his 600 men fled from Keilah before Saul could arrive. From that day on, David hid in the wilderness and the hills of Ziph. Saul hunted him relentlessly, but God never let Saul find him. Jonathan found David and strengthened his faith. Jonathan reminded him of God's promise, "You will be king. My father knows this, and I will stand beside you." The two renewed their covenant before the Lord, and Jonathan returned home. But others were not as loyal. The men of Ziph went to Saul and betrayed David's location. Saul blessed them for their report and ordered them to spy more carefully. Meanwhile, David moved deeper into the wilderness of Maon. There, Saul nearly trapped him on a mountain. David and his men were on one side, Saul's army closing in on the other. But just as capture seemed certain, a messenger rushed to Saul. The Philistines had attacked Israel again. Saul broke off his pursuit to defend his land. From then on, that place became known as the Rock of Escape. David moved on, finding refuge in the strongholds of En-Gedi. Saul returned from fighting the Philistines and was told David had gone into the wilderness of En-Gedi. He chose 3,000 of Israel's elite troops and set out toward the direction of David. Along the way, Saul entered a cave to relieve himself, unaware that David and his men were hidden deeper inside. David's men whispered urgently, "Now's your chance. Today the Lord is saying, He has delivered your enemy into your hands." David crept forward in silence. His blade sliced the edge of Saul's robe, but his heart struck him. He turned back to his men. "The Lord forbid that I should do this to my lord the king," he whispered. "I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed." He held them back, and they left. Not aware of anything, Saul rose and left the cave. He went on his way. Moments later, David stepped out into the sunlight. His voice carried across the valley, "My lord the king." Saul turned at the voice of David. David bowed low to the ground. "Why do you listen to those who say, 'I seek to harm you'?" David cried. "Today the Lord placed you in my hands. My men urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, 'I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed.' Look, my father." David held up the torn piece of cloth. "Here is the hem of your robe. I cut it, yet I didn't kill you. This proves I am no traitor. I haven't sinned against you, though you hunt me to take my life. May the Lord judge between us. May he punish you if he wills. But I will never harm you. Who is the king of Israel chasing? A dead dog? A single flea? Let the Lord be my judge. He will plead my case and rescue me from your hand." David's words echoed against the rocks. Saul's voice trembled in reply. "Is that really you, my son David?" Tears streamed down his face. "You are more righteous than I. You have repaid me good for evil. The Lord placed me in your hands, and you did not kill me. Who lets his enemy go free like this? May the Lord reward you for the kindness you've shown me. I know now that you will surely be king. The kingdom of Israel will be established in your hands. But swear to me by the Lord that you will not kill my descendants or wipe out my family name." David lifted his hand. "I swear it." Saul turned back toward home, while David and his men withdrew once more into their stronghold. David and his men had protected shepherds in the wilderness. When harvest time came, David sent a message, kindly asking for some food from one of them. But Nabal, who was known for his harshness, mocked David and refused. One of Nabal's servants rushed to Abigail, his wise and gentle wife. He explained how good David's men had been to them, and how Nabal's insult had put everyone in danger. Abigail quickly acted. Without telling her husband, she gathered bread, wine, roasted grain, raisins, and fig cakes, and set out with her servants. As she rode toward David, she met him and his angry men on their way to take revenge. Abigail hurried to the ground and bowed before David. "Please, my lord, let the blame fall on me. Pay no attention to Nabal, for he is foolish as his name suggests. The Lord has kept you from bloodshed today. May your enemies be like Nabal. Accept this gift, and when God makes you king, you will not have the burden of needless blood on your hands." David's anger softened. He blessed Abigail for her wisdom and praised God for sending her. He accepted her gifts and turned back, sparing Nabal's household. Later, when Abigail told Nabal what happened, his heart failed him. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard the news, he praised God for upholding justice. Soon after, he sent for Abigail, and she became his wife. The men of Ziph once again betrayed David, informing Saul that he was hiding on the hill of Hakilah. Saul gathered 3,000 of his best troops and set out into the wilderness to capture him. When David learned of Saul's approach, he sent spies to confirm the report. Then, one night, David and Abishai quietly entered Saul's camp. The king lay asleep, surrounded by his soldiers, with his spear stuck in the ground by his head. Abishai urged David to let him strike Saul down in one blow. But David refused. He declared that no one could lift a hand against the Lord's anointed and remain innocent. Instead, he took Saul's spear and water jug, and the two slipped away unseen, for the Lord had caused a deep sleep to fall upon Saul's men. From a safe distance on a nearby hill, David called out to Abner, Saul's commander, exposing how poorly he had guarded his king. He held up the spear and the jug as proof that Saul's life had been in his hands. Hearing David's voice, Saul recognized him. "Is that you, my son David?" David pleaded with him, asking why the king continued to pursue him, as though hunting a flea in the mountains. Convicted, Saul admitted his sin and promised not to harm David again. Then David said to the king, "Here is your spear. May the Lord value my life as I have valued yours today." Saul blessed David, saying he was sure David would succeed and do great things. After that, David returned to the wilderness, while Saul went back home. Again, David grew tired of running from Saul. He decided the safest place to hide was among the Philistines. So he took his men, along with their families, and went to Gath, where King Achish ruled. His wives, Ahinoam and Abigail, were also with him. When Saul heard David had fled to Gath, he stopped the chase. Before long, David asked Achish if he could live in the countryside instead of the royal city. Achish agreed and gave him the town of Ziklag. From then on, Ziklag belonged to the kings of Judah. During that time, David and his men went on raids against nearby towns. They took livestock and supplies leaving no one behind who could report what happened. Whenever Achish asked, "Where did you raid today?" David would answer in a way that made it sound like he had attacked his own people in Judah. Because of this, Achish trusted David completely. He thought, "The Israelites must hate him now. Surely he will stay and serve me forever." David and his men stayed there for 1 year and 4 months. The Philistines gathered their army at Aphek, while Israel camped near the spring of Jezreel. As the Philistine rulers reviewed their troops, David and his men marched at the rear with King Achish, but the commanders were alarmed. "Why are these Hebrews here?" they demanded. Achish replied, "David has been loyal. I've found no fault in him." Still, the commanders objected. "Send him back. He might turn against us in battle. Isn't this the same David the Israelites sing about? Saul killed thousands, but David tens of thousands?" So Achish called David aside. "You have been faithful, like an angel of God. I would gladly take you, but the other rulers fear you. At dawn, return quietly." David asked, "What have I done wrong? Why can't I fight your enemies?" Achish answered gently, "You have done no wrong. Yet for their sake, go back." But in David's heart, he knew he could never raise a sword against Israel, his own people, God's chosen nation. At daybreak, David and his men returned to Philistine territory, while the Philistine army marched on toward Jezreel. 3 days later, David and his men returned to Ziklag and found it burned to the ground. The Amalekites had raided the town and carried off their wives and children. The men wept until they had no strength left. Even David's 2 wives, Ahinoam and Abigail, were gone. The grief was so deep that some of the men even talked about stoning David. But David turned to the Lord for strength. He asked, "Shall I chase them? Will I catch them?" The Lord said, "Go. You will recover everything." David set out with 600 men. When they reached the brook Besor, 200 were too exhausted to continue. The remaining 400 pressed on. Along the way, they found an abandoned Egyptian slave, weak and starving. After feeding him, he revealed the Amalekites' location. He agreed to guide them if David promised not to harm him. That night, David and his men attacked. The Amalekites were scattered, celebrating their plunder. By the next evening, all were defeated, except 400 who escaped on camels. David recovered everything: his wives, children, and all the stolen goods. Nothing was missing. Even the flocks and herds were returned. When they reunited with the exhausted men left behind, some grumbled. They didn't fight, so why share the plunder? David replied, "No. The Lord gave us this victory. Everyone shares, those who fought and those who guarded the supplies." From that day, this became a law in Israel. David also sent gifts from the recovered plunder to the elders and towns of Judah, saying, "Here is a gift from the Lord's enemies." The Philistines attacked Israel, and the Israelite army fled. Many were killed on Mount Gilboa. Saul's sons, Abinadab and Malchishua, were among those who died, including Jonathan. Saul fought bravely, but the Philistine archers wounded him badly. Terrified of being captured, Saul asked his armor-bearer to kill him. When he refused, Saul took his own sword and killed himself. Seeing their king dead, the armor-bearer did the same. That day, Saul, his sons, and his army were all gone. The Israelites fled, and the Philistines occupied their towns. The next day, the Philistines displayed Saul's body and his armor in their cities, proclaiming his death. But the people of Jabesh-Gilead acted with courage. Under cover of night, they retrieved the bodies, burned them, and buried the bones beneath a tamarisk tree. They mourned for 7 days. After Saul's death, David returned from defeating the Amalekites. On the third day, a man came from Saul's camp, clothes torn and dust on his head, mourning deeply. He told David that Israel's army had fled, and Saul and his son Jonathan were dead. The man had brought his crown and armband to David. David and his men tore their clothes and mourned all day for Saul, Jonathan, and the army of Israel. Then David commanded justice. The Amalekite was put to death for killing the Lord's anointed. David composed the Song of the Bow to honor Saul and Jonathan, calling them mighty heroes. But his heart lingered on Jonathan, his dear friend. He remembered Jonathan's loyalty, his courage, and how he had protected and supported David through every danger. With a heavy heart, David mourned aloud. How the mighty have fallen, stripped of their weapons, lying dead on the hills. At that moment, he grieved deeply. Not just a friend lost, but the love and loyalty that had carried him through dark times. After years of running, hiding, and constant danger, David finally breathed a sigh of relief. Saul, the king who had relentlessly pursued him, was gone. David took a moment to lift his heart to God, thanking him for protection and guidance. He whispered a prayer of praise. "I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. Let the humble hear and be glad." Psalm 34. He sought the Lord again. "Should I return to Judah?" The answer came clearly. "Yes, go to Hebron." David gathered his wives along with his men and their families, and they moved to the villages near Hebron. The men of Judah came and anointed David as their king, and once again, David felt a surge of relief. He reflected on the loyalty of the people who had cared for Saul, even in his death. David sent word to the people of Jabesh Gilead, expressing his gratitude. He praised them for honoring Saul with a proper burial and for their faithfulness. Then he spoke to all of Judah. As he stepped into leadership, he asked them to stand with him, united and loyal, ready to move forward together. Though Saul's sons had fallen in battle, one remained. His name was Ishbosheth. Abner, the commander of Saul's army, brought him to Mahanaim and crowned him king over Israel. Meanwhile, David ruled in Hebron, and the people of Judah stayed loyal to him. One day, Abner led Ishbosheth's troops from Mahanaim to Gibeon, while at the same time, Joab led David's men to meet them. The two armies faced each other across the pool of Gibeon, tense and ready. To test their strength, Abner suggested, 12 warriors from Ishbosheth's side and 12 from David's side should step forward and fight. Joab agreed. Faces set with determination, they clashed fiercely, gripping each other in hand-to-hand combat. All 24 died in the fight. This spot would forever be known as the Field of Swords. But the battle didn't end there. A fierce battle followed that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were defeated by the forces of David. Among David's warriors were the 3 sons of Zeruiah, Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. Asahel, swift and relentless like a gazelle, began chasing Abner. Abner looked back and tried to warn him to turn aside, fearing for Asahel's life and not wanting to face Joab afterward. But Asahel would not stop. Seeing no other choice, Abner thrust the butt of his spear through Asahel, and the young man fell, lifeless, onto the battlefield. Everyone froze at the tragic sight. When Joab and Abishai learned what had happened, they set out in pursuit of Abner. They caught up to him as the sun was setting near the hill of Ammah, by the road to the wilderness of Gibeon. Abner's men regrouped on the hill, ready for a stand. Abner called down, urging an end to the chasing, warning that bitterness would only grow between them. Joab agreed, realizing that had Abner not spoken, they might have chased him all night. Joab blew the ram's horn, signaling his men to stop, and Abner and his troops retreated through the Jordan Valley, crossing the river and continuing until they reached Mahanaim by morning. Joab and his men returned home as well, counting their losses. 19 men missing, in addition to Asahel. On the other side, 360 of Abner's men, all from Benjamin, had fallen. David's men carried Asahel's body back to Bethlehem and laid him to rest in his father's tomb. Afterward, they traveled through the night and arrived in Hebron at daybreak. That was the beginning of a long war between those who were loyal to Saul and those loyal to David. As time passed, David became stronger and stronger, while Saul's dynasty became weaker and weaker. During the long struggle between Saul's house and David's house, Abner grew strong and respected. But one day, a serious accusation from Ishbosheth, Saul's son, angered him deeply. He had accused him of sleeping with one of his father's concubines, a direct act of treason. Frustrated and determined, Abner made a bold choice. He would support David and help bring the people together. Abner sent messengers to David, promising to unite the nation. David agreed, asking only that his wife Michal be returned. She was taken from her husband, Palti, who followed her in sorrow, weeping until Abner gently sent him home. Abner then spoke with the elders and leaders of Israel. He reminded them that they had long hoped for change and encouraged them to support David. Slowly, the people agreed, and a plan for unity began to take shape. Abner traveled to Hebron to meet David. David welcomed him and his men with a warm feast, honoring their courage and loyalty. With Abner leading the way, the people were called together, paving the way for a new chapter of hope and unity for all of Israel. Just after David had sent Abner away safely, Joab returned from a raid with his soldiers, bringing back a great amount of plunder. When he heard that Abner had been with the king and left unharmed, anger flared. Joab believed Abner had come to spy. Without David's knowledge, he sent messengers to catch up with Abner, and they brought him back to Hebron. When Abner arrived at the city gate, Joab called him aside. He pretended to speak privately, but instead of a conversation, Joab struck him down. Joab killed Abner in revenge for the death of his brother Asahel. David was heartbroken when he heard the news. He declared that he and his kingdom were innocent of Abner's death. He laid the guilt squarely on Joab and his family. Then David ordered proper mourning for Abner. "Tear your clothes and put on burlap. Mourn for Abner," he instructed. David himself walked behind the procession to the grave, and the people wept deeply. At the burial, David sang, "Should Abner have died as fools die? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not chained. No, you were murdered, the victim of a wicked plot." David fasted throughout the day, refusing food until sundown, and the people understood that he had no part in the murder. Though a great commander had fallen, David trusted that the Lord would repay the evil done by Joab and Abishai, who were too powerful for him to control. The nation grieved. Justice remained in God's hands, and Abner's life was honored with sorrow and dignity. When Ishbosheth, Saul's son, heard that Abner had been killed at Hebron, he lost all courage. Fear spread through Israel. People were paralyzed and unsure what to do. Two brothers, Baana and Rechab, were captains of Ishbosheth's raiding parties. They lived in Beeroth, a town in Benjamin's territory. One hot noon, they went to Ishbosheth's house. He was resting, and the doorkeeper, tired from sifting wheat, had fallen asleep. The brothers slipped inside, unnoticed. They found Ishbosheth asleep. They struck him down and cut off his head. Then they carried it and fled across the Jordan Valley during the night. At Hebron, They presented the head to David. They claimed they had avenged him and punished Saul's family. David was shocked and grieved. He declared the Lord was his witness. He could never reward murder, especially the killing of an innocent man in his own home. David commanded his young men to carry out justice. Baana and Rechab were killed. Their hands and feet were cut off. Their bodies were displayed by the pool in Hebron. Ishbosheth's head was buried in Abner's tomb. His memory was honored with care. All the tribes of Israel went to David at Hebron. They reminded him of his leadership. They spoke of how he had guided Israel's forces while Saul was king. They remembered God's promise that David would shepherd his people. At Hebron, David made a covenant before the Lord with the elders of Israel. They anointed him king over all Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign. He ruled for 40 years in total. David led his men to Jerusalem to fight the Jebusites, the original inhabitants of the land. The people thought they were safe and mocked him. Long before, David had brought Goliath's head to Jerusalem after defeating the giant, showing that God was with him. Now he returned with his men to take the city. David captured the fortress of Zion. The stronghold became known as the City of David. He made it his home and expanded the city, starting at the supporting terraces and working inward. David grew stronger and more respected as the Lord God of heaven's armies was with him. King Hiram of Tyre sent cedar timber, carpenters, and stonemasons to build him a palace. David knew the Lord had blessed his kingdom for the sake of Israel. After moving from Hebron, he took more wives and concubines, and they had more sons and daughters. When the Philistines heard that David had been made king, they gathered their armies to capture him. David was warned and took shelter in a stronghold. The Philistines spread out across the valley of Rephaim. David asked the Lord for guidance, and God promised victory. David attacked at Baal-perazim and defeated the Philistines. "The Lord did it! He burst through my enemies like a raging flood!" he exclaimed. That place was named Baal-perazim, meaning the Lord who bursts through. Later the Philistines returned, spreading across the valley again. David sought God's direction. This time God told him to circle around and strike near the poplar trees. When David heard a sound like marching in the treetops, he knew God was leading the attack. He obeyed and defeated the Philistines completely, from Gibeon to Gaza. Victory came not by strength alone, but because David followed God's plan. David called Israel's best warriors of 30,000. He led the troops to Judah to bring back the Ark of God. The Ark, the very presence of the Lord, rode on a new cart. Uzzah and Ahio led the way. David and the people followed, singing and playing instruments. Lyres, harps, tambourines, and cymbals. Joy filled the air. Then disaster struck. At the threshing floor, the oxen stumbled. Uzzah reached out to steady the ark. In a flash, God's anger struck. Uzzah fell, lifeless beside the ark. Shock and fear rippled through the crowd. David named the place Perez Uzzah. Frightened, David paused. He placed the ark in Obed-Edom's house. 3 months passed. God blessed Obed-Edom's household for the ark's presence. David heard the news and acted. With courage and joy, he brought the ark to the city of David. Bulls and calves were sacrificed. David danced with all his strength, wearing a priestly garment. Israel shouted and blew ram's horns. The ark was home finally, and celebration filled the city. As the ark of the Lord entered the city of David, Michal, Saul's daughter, watched from her window. She saw David leaping and dancing before the Lord and felt contempt for him. He removed his royal robes so that he could dance more freely. Without them, he looked just like a regular citizen in his kingdom. Despite his countless victories, David wasn't prideful and considered himself one of the people. The ark was placed inside the special tent David had prepared. David offered burnt offerings and peace offerings to the Lord. When he finished, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies. David gave every man and woman a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins. Then the people went home. When David returned to bless his family, Michal met him, her face twisted in a snarl. She quickly began to dig into him, criticizing him for removing his royal garments before the servant girls. David replied, "I celebrate before the Lord, who chose me over your father and his family. I will celebrate before him, even if it makes me look foolish. My joy is in the Lord, not in human opinion." Because of her contempt, Michal remained childless all her life. David had finally settled in his palace. The Lord had given him rest from all his enemies. He looked around and realized something. He lived in a beautiful cedar house, but the Ark of God was still in a tent. David wanted to do something about it. He called the prophet Nathan to share his thoughts. That night, God spoke to Nathan. He reminded him that he had never needed a house. From the time he brought Israel out of Egypt, God had moved in tents with his people. God had chosen David from being a shepherd. He had been with David in every battle and had defeated all his enemies. God promised that David's name would be famous. Israel would have a safe homeland, free from harm. God also promised David a lasting dynasty. One of his descendants would build a temple for God. His throne would be secure forever. God would guide him like a father, but his favor would never be taken away. Nathan told David everything God had said. David sat before the Lord and prayed, "Who am I, O Lord, and what is my family, that you have brought me this far? You promise my family a lasting kingdom. May the house of David last before you forever. Let your blessing continue, O Lord. It is an eternal blessing." David defeated the Philistines and took their city, Gath. Moab also surrendered and paid tribute. Next, he fought Hadadezer, king of Zobah, and crushed his army. He captured thousands of soldiers and hundreds of chariots. The Arameans came to help, but David defeated them too and made them pay tribute. God gave David victory everywhere. He brought gold, bronze, and treasures to Jerusalem and dedicated them to God. Even King Toi of Hamath sent gifts. David also defeated 18,000 Edomites and stationed soldiers across Edom. All Edomites became his subjects. God made David victorious everywhere. He ruled Israel fairly and wisely. Joab led the army. Jehoshaphat recorded history. Zadok and Ahimelech served as priests, and Benaiah led David's bodyguard. After David became king, he asked a question. Was anyone from Saul's family still alive? He wanted to show kindness for Jonathan's sake. He called Ziba, a servant of Saul. Ziba spoke. One of Jonathan's sons was alive. His name was Mephibosheth. He was crippled in both feet. He lived in Lodebar in the house of Machir. David sent for him. When Mephibosheth arrived, he bowed low. David welcomed him. He promised to show kindness for Jonathan. He gave him all Saul's land, and Mephibosheth would eat at the king's table like one of his sons. Mephibosheth was stunned. He called himself unworthy, like a dead dog. David turned to Ziba. All the land belonged to Mephibosheth. Ziba, with his 15 sons and 20 servants, would farm it for him. But Mephibosheth would eat at the king's table. Ziba agreed. From that day, Mephibosheth shared meals with the king. He had a young son named Micah. All of Ziba's household served him. Even crippled in both feet, Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem and ate at the king's table. King Nahash of the Ammonites died, and his son Hanun took the throne. David sent men to show kindness, but Hanun was tricked. His commanders said David's men were spies. Hanun shamed them. He shaved half their beards, cut their robes, and sent them home. David told them to wait in Jericho until their beards grew back. The Ammonites got angry and hired 20,000 Arameans plus more allies. David sent Joab to fight. Joab attacked the Arameans. His brother Abishai attacked the Ammonites. The Arameans ran. The Ammonites fled back into the city. The Arameans tried again under Shobach. David gathered all Israel. They defeated them, killing thousands, and Shobach too. The enemy kings surrendered, and the Arameans never helped the Ammonites again. It was spring, the time when kings usually went to war. David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They defeated the army and laid siege to Rabbah. But David stayed behind in Jerusalem. One afternoon, after resting, David walked on the roof of the palace. From there, he saw a woman bathing. She was very beautiful. David had resisted temptation many times. From the halls of Saul to the rewards of war, he had walked in integrity when no one was watching. Yet now, at the height of power, with more victories than ever before, something in his heart shifted. Something wicked began to rise inside of him. In that moment, he forgot the king who really rules. He asked who she was and learned her name, Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. David sent messengers to bring her to the palace. That night, David slept with her, and she returned home. Later, Bathsheba sent a message to David. She was pregnant. David called for Uriah and asked him how the war was going. Then he told Uriah to go home and rest. He even sent a gift with him. But Uriah refused to go home. He slept at the palace entrance with the king's guards. David asked him why. Uriah said, "The soldiers are out in the field. How could I go home and enjoy comforts while they are in tents?" David was amazed by Uriah's loyalty. He saw the man's honor and devotion to his comrades. David let him stay another day. The next evening, David invited Uriah to dinner and gave him wine. But Uriah still would not go home. He slept at the palace entrance again, faithful to his fellow soldiers. David's plan was fooled. He began to panic. Uriah and everyone else in the kingdom would know that this child was not his own, and all eyes would begin to turn to David. Deep cracks were beginning to set into David's once flawless reputation. His heart, however, had already turned black and hardened. The next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab. He gave it to Uriah to deliver. The letter instructed Joab to place Uriah at the front lines, where the fighting was fiercest. Then David told him to pull back, so Uriah would be killed. David's heart had become so sick that he'd made this innocent man deliver his own death warrant. Joab followed the instructions. He put Uriah near the city wall, where the enemy soldiers were strongest. When the enemy came out to fight, Uriah was killed, along with several other Israelite soldiers. Joab sent a messenger to report the battle to David. He warned the messenger that the king might ask why the soldiers had gone so close to the city walls. The messenger told David that Uriah the Hittite had also died. David responded calmly, telling the messenger to encourage Joab. "The sword devours one today and another tomorrow. Fight harder next time and conquer the city." When Uriah's wife heard the news, she mourned deeply for her husband. After the mourning period, David sent for her and brought her to the palace. She became one of his wives, and she later gave birth to a son. But deep in his heart, David knew that Uriah's honor had shone brighter than his own desires. And the Lord was displeased with what David had done. The Lord sent Nathan the prophet to speak to David. Nathan told him a story. There were two men in a town. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man owned many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned only one little lamb. He raised it like a child. It ate from his plate and drank from his cup. He loved it dearly. One day, a guest came to the rich man's house. Instead of taking one of his own animals, the rich man took the poor man's lamb. He killed it and prepared it for the guest. David became furious. He said the man deserved to die. He said the man must repay 4 lambs for taking the one. Then Nathan looked at David and said, "You are that man." The Lord, the God of Israel, reminded David of all he had done for him. He had made David king, saved him from Saul, given him Saul's house and wives, and promised even more. Yet David had despised the Lord's word. He had done a terrible thing. He had murdered Uriah the Hittite and taken his wife. Nathan told David the consequences. His family would now live by the sword. His household would rebel against him. His wives would be taken by another man, and it would happen in full view of Israel. What David had done in secret, God would make public. David broke down and told everything to Nathan. He cried, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan told him, "David, the Lord has forgiven you. You will not die for this sin, but because of what you did, your child will." After Nathan left, the Lord sent an incurable illness to David's child. David begged God to spare him. He went without food and lay on the ground all night, wailing. The elders of his household pleaded with him to eat, but he refused. On the 7th day, the child died. David's advisors were afraid to tell him. They worried about how he would react. When David saw them whispering, he asked, "Is the child dead?" They answered, "Yes." David got up, washed himself, put on lotion, and changed his clothes. He went to the tabernacle and worshipped the Lord. Then he returned to the palace and ate. His advisors were amazed. They said, "We don't understand. While the child was alive, you wept and refused to eat. Now that he is dead, you eat?" David explained, "While he was alive, I fasted and prayed, hoping the Lord would be gracious and let him live. But now that he is dead, why should I fast? I cannot bring him back. I will go to him one day, but he cannot return to me." David had accepted God's judgment. It was a heavy price to pay for the heavy sin that he had committed. In that season, David poured out his heart to God. "Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me." Psalm 51. David had finally seen the weight of his sin. He learned that God does not despise a broken and contrite heart. Psalm 51:17. Even in his failure, he discovered that mercy was greater than judgment. David comforted Bathsheba, and they were together. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. David named him Solomon. The Lord loved him. Nathan the prophet told them to also name him Jedidiah, meaning beloved of the Lord. David's son Absalom had a sister named Tamar. She was very beautiful. Amnon, her half-brother, fell desperately in love with her. He became so obsessed that he became sick. Amnon had a cousin named Jonadab, a clever man. Jonadab asked Amnon why he looked so sad every morning. Amnon told him he loved Tamar. Jonadab gave him a wicked plan. He said, "Pretend to be sick. When your father comes, ask him to let Tamar prepare food for you. Tell her to feed you herself." Amnon followed the plan. David sent Tamar to his house to prepare his favorite dish. She baked it and brought it to him. But when she set the tray down, Amnon refused to eat. He told everyone to leave. Then he demanded that Tamar feed him in his bedroom. As she fed him, Amnon grabbed her. He tried to force her. Tamar cried out, "No, my brother, don't do this. Such wicked things are not done in Israel. Please ask the king to let me marry you." Amnon ignored her. He was stronger than she was. He raped her. Then Amnon hated her. He sent her out and locked the door behind her. Tamar's beautiful robe was torn. She put ashes on her head and wept, covering her face with her hands. Her brother Absalom saw her. He asked what had happened. Tamar told him. Absalom told her, "Be quiet for now. Don't worry. He is your brother." Tamar lived as a desolate woman in Absalom's house. Absalom never spoke to Amnon about it, but he hated him deeply for what he had done to Tamar. When King David heard what happened, he was very angry, but he did nothing. This was a tragedy. David, once known for justice, stayed silent. Sin had entered his own house. Murder, adultery, even rape, and the people saw it. The silence spoke loudly, and the kingdom was starting to crack. Justice was not carried out. Pain was left unanswered, and the cracks in David's household grew deeper. And because of this one event, Absalom would rise in revenge and rebel. As for David, it's another time to hide. 2 years passed after Tamar's tragedy. Absalom's sheep were being sheared at Baal-Hazor, near Ephraim. Absalom invited all the king's sons to a feast. He went to King David and said, "My sheep shearers are working. Please come celebrate with me." David replied, "No, my son, we would be too much for you." Absalom pressed him, but the king would not come. He gave Absalom his blessing instead. Absalom then asked, "What about my brother Amnon?" David hesitated, but Absalom kept pressing. Finally, the king agreed to let all his sons attend, including Amnon. Absalom prepared a grand feast. He told his men, "Wait until Amnon gets drunk. Then, at my signal, kill him. Do not fear. I command it." At Absalom's signal, Amnon was murdered. The other sons of the king fled on their mules. On the way back to Jerusalem, news reached David. "Absalom has killed all the king's sons. Not one is alive." David tore his robe and fell to the ground in grief. His advisors also tore their clothes in horror. Then Jonadab, son of David's brother Shimea, arrived. He said, "Do not believe all your sons are dead. Only Amnon has been killed. Absalom has planned this ever since Amnon harmed Tamar." Meanwhile, Absalom escaped. A watchman saw a great crowd coming down the hill. He ran to tell the king. Jonadab said, "There they are. The king's sons are coming, just as I said." The sons arrived weeping. David and all his servants wept with them. David mourned many days for Amnon. Absalom fled to his grandfather Talmai, king of Geshur, and stayed there 3 years. David, now reconciled to Amnon's death, longed to be reunited with Absalom. Joab realized how much the king longed to see Absalom. He sent for a wise woman from Tekoa. She was known for her wisdom. Joab instructed her to pretend she was in mourning. She wore mourning clothes and acted like she had been grieving a long time. She was to tell the king a story he could not ignore. The woman went to the king. She bowed deeply and cried out for help. She told a story about a widow whose 2 sons had fought. One son had been killed. The rest of the family demanded that the other son be executed. She feared her family line would disappear. The king listened and promised to protect her son. The woman pleaded further, urging the king to act as he had promised for the people of God. She spoke of justice, mercy, and God's ways. The king asked if Joab had sent her. She admitted it. Joab confessed that he wanted the matter presented in a new light so the king could act. The king agreed. Joab went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. However, the king commanded that Absalom must not enter his presence. Absalom returned to his own house, but he did not see the king. Absalom was the most handsome man in all Israel. He was flawless from head to foot. His hair grew very long, and he cut it only once a year because it was so heavy. When weighed, it came to 5 pounds. He had 3 sons and a daughter named Tamar, who was very beautiful. Absalom lived in Jerusalem for 2 years, but he never saw the king. He sent for Joab to intercede for him, but Joab refused. He sent again, and still Joab did not come. Frustrated, Absalom told his servants to set fire to Joab's barley field next to his own. The servants obeyed. Joab came to Absalom and demanded an explanation. Absalom said he wanted Joab to ask the king why he had been brought back from Geshur if he could not see him. He was ready to face the king and accept any punishment. Joab reported Absalom's words to the king. Finally, David summoned Absalom. Absalom came, bowed low, and the king kissed him. Absalom bought a chariot and horses and hired 50 men to run ahead of him. Every morning he went to the city gate. When people came with cases for the king, he asked where they were from. He praised their cases and said how he wished he could judge them. People began to bring their disputes to him, and he treated them kindly, taking them by the hand and kissing them. He did not allow them to bow. Through this, Absalom won the hearts of all Israel. After 4 years, he told the king he wanted to go to Hebron to offer a sacrifice and fulfill a vow he had made while in Geshur. David allowed him to go. While in Hebron, Absalom secretly sent messengers to stir up rebellion. He instructed them that when they heard the ram's horn, they should proclaim him king. He took 200 men from Jerusalem with him, unaware of his plan. While offering sacrifices, he sent for Ahithophel, one of David's counselors, and soon many others joined him. The conspiracy grew stronger. A messenger came to Jerusalem with bad news. All Israel had joined Absalom in a plot against David. David knew they had to leave quickly to save themselves and the city. His advisors agreed. The king and his household left at once, leaving only 10 concubines to take care of the palace. They walked on foot. David's men led the way. 600 men from Gath were with him, along with his bodyguard. David told Ittai, the leader of the men from Gath, to go back home. He was a foreigner and should not be forced to wander with them, but Ittai swore he would follow the king wherever he went, even if it meant death. David let him stay, and Ittai and his men went with them. The people cried loudly as they left. They crossed the Kidron Valley and went toward the wilderness. Zadok and the Levites carried the Ark of the Covenant. Abiathar offered sacrifices until everyone had left the city. David told Zadok to return the Ark to Jerusalem. If God willed, he would see it again. David also sent Zadok, Abiathar, and their sons to watch and report back to him. David climbed the Mount of Olives, weeping. His head was covered and his feet bare. The people with him also mourned. Then he heard that Ahithophel, his trusted advisor, had joined Absalom. David prayed that God would make Ahithophel's advice fail. At the top of the hill, Hushai the Archite met David. He also mourned with torn clothes and dirt on his head. David told him to return to Jerusalem. Hushai would pretend to be Absalom's advisor. He would oppose Ahithophel and help David. Zadok and Abiathar would send their sons to give David news from the palace. Hushai went back, arriving just as Absalom came to Jerusalem. After crossing the summit of the Mount of Olives, David met Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth. Ziba had brought 2 donkeys carrying 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 bunches of summer fruit, and a wineskin of wine. The bread and fruit were for the young men, and the wine was for those who grew tired in the wilderness. The donkeys were for the people to ride. David asked about Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson. Ziba said he had stayed in Jerusalem, hoping to reclaim his grandfather's kingdom. David then gave all of Mephibosheth's possessions to Ziba. Ziba bowed and promised to serve the king faithfully. As David reached Bahurim, a man from the village, Shimei son of Gera, came out cursing him. Shimei was from Saul's family. He threw stones at David and his men, shouting that David was being punished for Saul's blood and that the Lord had given the kingdom to Absalom. Abishai, one of David's warriors, wanted to kill Shimei, but David stopped him. He said that if the Lord had told Shimei to curse him, no one should interfere. David explained that his own son was trying to take his life, so a relative of Saul had even more reason to be angry. He decided to leave Shimei alone, hoping the Lord would see his suffering and bless him. Shimei followed David along the hillside, continuing to curse and throw stones. Finally, David and his men grew weary and rested when they reached the Jordan River. Absalom and the army of Israel reached Jerusalem. Ahithophel came with them. Hushai, David's friend, also arrived. He went straight to Absalom. He greeted him respectfully. Absalom asked why he was not with David. Hushai said he served the man chosen by the Lord and all Israel. He added that he could serve Absalom too, like he had served his father. Absalom asked Ahithophel for advice. Ahithophel told him to sleep with his father's concubines. They had been left to watch the palace. He said this would show Absalom had broken from David. It would make Israel support him. Absalom obeyed. He went to the palace roof where all could see him. He slept with the concubines. Every word from Ahithophel seemed as wise as if it came from God. Absalom followed him completely. Ahithophel gave Absalom advice. He planned to take 12,000 men that night to pursue David. He would catch David while he was tired and discouraged. The king's troops would panic and scatter. Only David would be killed. Then the people would return to Absalom. Everyone would be at peace. Absalom and the elders of Israel thought the plan was very good. Absalom called for Hushai the Archite and asked for his advice. Hushai warned that David and his men were mighty warriors. They were alert, experienced, and ready for battle. A quick attack could fail and cause panic among Absalom's troops. Hushai suggested gathering the entire army of Israel from Dan to Bathsheba. He advised Absalom to lead them personally. The army would then overwhelm David completely. If David escaped to a town, they could destroy it and capture him. Absalom and all Israel chose Hushai's plan. The Lord had planned to frustrate Ahithophel's counsel. This would bring disaster on Absalom. Hushai told Zadok and Abiathar what Ahithophel had advised and what he himself had suggested. He urged them to warn David not to stay at the Jordan's shallows that night. David needed to cross into the wilderness immediately to survive. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were hiding at Enrogel, ready to deliver the message. A boy spotted them and reported them to Absalom. They fled to Bahurim, where a man hid them in a well. His wife covered the well with a cloth and scattered grain on top to avoid suspicion. Absalom's men searched for them but found nothing. The two messengers escaped and reached David, warning him of Ahithophel's plan. David and his people crossed the Jordan River that night and were safe by dawn. Ahithophel realized his counsel had been ignored. He returned home, arranged his affairs, and hanged himself. David reached Mahanaim, where Absalom had gathered the Israelite army and appointed Amasa as commander. Absalom and his troops camped in Gilead. David was warmly welcomed by Shobi, Machir, and Barzillai. They brought food, supplies, and provisions for him and his people, knowing they were exhausted and hungry from the long march through the wilderness. David organized the men with him and appointed generals and captains. He divided the troops into 3 groups, placing one under Joab, one under Abishai, and one under Ittai from Gath. David told the troops he would go with them, but they strongly objected. They warned him that if he went, Absalom's forces would target him, and his life was worth more than thousands of soldiers. David agreed and stayed by the town gate as the troops marched out in organized groups. He commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai to treat Absalom gently for his sake. The battle began in the forest of Ephraim. David's men defeated the Israelite troops, killing 20,000. Many more died in the forest itself than by the sword. During the fight, Absalom rode into thick branches on his mule. His hair became caught, leaving him hanging. One of David's men saw him and reported it to Joab. The soldier refused to kill Absalom, remembering the king's order. Joab ignored him. He drove 3 daggers into Absalom's heart while he hung there. 10 of Joab's young men finished him off. Joab blew the ram's horn to signal the end of the chase. They threw Absalom's body into a deep pit and piled stones over it. All Israel fled to their homes. Absalom had built a monument for himself in the king's valley, saying he had no son to carry on his name. The monument still bears his name today. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, wanted to run to David with the news that God had rescued him. Joab refused, saying it would not be good news because Absalom was dead. Instead, Joab sent a man from Ethiopia to report what had happened. Ahimaaz kept pleading, and Joab finally allowed him to go. Ahimaaz took the easier route across the plain and ran ahead of the Ethiopian. David sat between the inner and outer gates when the watchman climbed to the roof. He saw a man running and called down to David. Another man appeared soon after, and David guessed they both brought news. Ahimaaz arrived first. He bowed and praised God, saying the rebels had been defeated. David asked about Absalom. Ahimaaz admitted he did not know. Then the Ethiopian arrived and reported that the Lord had rescued the king from all his enemies. When asked about Absalom, he said that the young man was dead, wishing the same fate on David's enemies. David was overcome with grief. He went to the room above the gateway and wept loudly, crying, "O my son Absalom, my son, my son! If only I had died instead of you." Word soon reached Joab that the king was weeping for Absalom. David's deep grief for his son spread among the people, and the joy of the day's victory turned into sorrow. The people crept back into the town quietly, ashamed as if they had deserted in battle. The king covered his face and mourned for Absalom without ceasing. Joab went to him and reminded him of the lives they had saved that day, his own and those of his family. He urged the king to honor the troops and not let his grief dishonor their efforts. Finally, David went out and sat at the town gate. Word spread quickly, and the people came to him. Those who had supported Absalom had already fled to their homes. Throughout Israel, there was much discussion. The people remembered how David had saved them from their enemies and the Philistines, while Absalom had chased him out. Now that Absalom was dead, the people wanted David to return as their king. David sent Zadok and Abiathar to the elders of Judah, reminding them that they were his relatives and his own tribe. He also sent a message to Amasa, appointing him commander of the army in place of Joab. Amasa convinced the men of Judah to support David. They responded unanimously and sent word for the king to return, along with all who were with him. King David began his journey back to Jerusalem. When he reached the Jordan River, the people of Judah came to meet him at Gilgal. They helped him and his household cross the river safely. Shimei, the man who had cursed David, came quickly with 1,000 men from Benjamin, including Ziba, his sons and servants. They bowed and asked forgiveness for their past wrongs. David spared Shimei's life, showing mercy instead of punishing him. Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also came down to meet David. He had not cared for himself since the king left Jerusalem. He explained that Ziba had deceived him, but he was grateful that David still honored him. David decided to divide the land between Mephibosheth and Ziba, but Mephibosheth insisted David's safety was enough. Barzillai of Gilead, an elderly and wealthy man who had helped David during his exile, came to escort him. David invited him to live in Jerusalem, but Barzillai declined, saying he was too old. He allowed his son Kimham to go with the king instead. David blessed Barzillai and continued across the Jordan with Kimham and the people. All the troops of Judah and half of Israel escorted David. Tension arose when the men of Israel complained that Judah had taken the honor of helping the king. The men of Judah argued back, insisting the king was one of their own. The dispute between the tribes continued fiercely as David moved forward. Once again, the Philistines fought against Israel. David grew weak and tired in the battle. Ishbi-Benob, a giant cornered David. His bronze spearhead was very heavy, and he carried a new sword. He was about to kill David. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, rushed to help. He struck down the giant and saved David. David's men warned him not to fight in the front lines again, saying he was the light of Israel. In another battle at Gob, Sibbecai from Hushah killed Saph, another giant. Later, Elhanan from Bethlehem killed the brother of Goliath. His spear handle was as thick as a weaver's beam. In Gath, they met a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. He mocked Israel, but Jonathan, son of David's brother Shimea, killed him. These 4 giants from Gath were all defeated by David and his warriors. David sang songs of praises unto God, the God that had rescued him from all his enemies. My God is my rock, in whom I find protection. He is my shield, the power that saves me, and my place of safety. He is my refuge, my Savior, the one who saves me from violence. I called on the Lord, who is worthy of praise, and he saved me from my enemies. 2 Samuel 22, 3-4. These are the last words of King David, the sweet psalmist of Israel. God spoke through him. He said, "Those who lead with justice and honor God are like the bright morning sun, clear, shining, full of life." God promised his protection and blessings for David's family forever. But the wicked, they are like sharp thorns, dangerous. They must be cut down. They will be completely destroyed. David's final words remind us, follow God and be victorious. Reject him, and destruction follows. These are the mightiest warriors of King David. First was Jashobeam the Hakmonite. He once killed 800 enemies with a single spear in one battle. Next was Eleazar, son of Dodai. One day, he and David stood alone against the Philistines. The rest of the army ran away. Eleazar fought until his hand grew tired. God gave him a great victory that day. Then there was Shammah, son of Agi. The Philistines attacked the Israelites in a field of lentils. Everyone else ran, but Shammah stood his ground. He fought back, and God brought a great victory. Once during the harvest, David was in the cave of Adullam. The Philistines were camped in the valley of Rephaim. Bethlehem was occupied by the enemy. David longed for water from the well at the gate of Bethlehem. The 3 warriors broke through the Philistine lines. They drew the water and brought it to David. But David refused to drink it. He poured it out as an offering to God. He said, "I cannot drink this. It is as precious as the lives of the men who risked everything to bring it." These were the heroic deeds of David's 3 mighty warriors. King David was old. His son Adonijah thought he could take the throne. He gathered chariots, soldiers, and invited guests. He declared himself king, but he left out Solomon, David's chosen son, and some key leaders. Nathan the prophet and Solomon's mother, Bathsheba, acted quickly. They went to King David. They reminded him of his promise. David declared Solomon king that very day. Solomon was anointed at Gihon Spring. The people shouted, "Long live King Solomon!" Joy and celebration shook the city. Adonijah and his guests panicked. Adonijah ran to the altar, asking for mercy. Solomon spared him because he stayed loyal. David saw the promise fulfilled and praised God. Solomon became king, and peace returned. As King David neared the end of his life, he called his son Solomon to him. He gave him final instructions. David told Solomon to be strong and courageous. He urged him to follow God's laws and ways. If Solomon obeyed, God's promise to David would continue. David also gave Solomon advice about people to punish and people to honor. Joab, who had killed David's army commanders, needed justice. Barzillai's sons, who had cared for David in hard times, should be honored. Shimei, who had cursed David, should also face consequences. even though David had spared him before. Then David died. He was buried with his ancestors in Jerusalem. Solomon became king. His kingdom was firmly established, and God's plan for Israel continued through him. David's story didn't end in the tomb. God had made promise to him. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever. Your throne will be established forever. 2 Samuel 7:12-16. Generations passed. Kings rose and fell. The kingdom split and was conquered. Yet the promise stayed. One quiet night in Bethlehem, shepherds watching their flocks saw angels and heard a message of hope. The promise to King David was fulfilled. From David's line came the Messiah, the true son of David. Like David, at first it seemed like nothing would come of him, yet his life would change the world. And as the promise said, his throne will also reign forever. David's life inspires us and shows what God can do when someone trusts him fully. From little beginnings to a legacy that lasts forever. When your story is told, will it show faith that held on to God in hard times? We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. May the Lord's peace and blessings be with you and your family. Amen.